The whole of what Edith Marsh had left in the world came to $63.40, and a building the county had already promised to knock down. The money was in a coffee tin on the kitchen counter of a house that was no longer hers, counted twice, because she did not believe it the first time. The building was a one-room brick post office at the crossroads where two farm roads met, and neither one went much of anywhere anymore. Boarded at the windows, appraised at nothing, an eyesore a man in a clean gray suit wanted gone so he could have the corner lot. She was 58 years old, widowed 9 days, and she had come home to bury her husband Ray and sign away the last worthless thing his family had shoved in her direction like a plate nobody wanted at supper. The tax card called the value of it 0. Not low. 0, what Edith did not know, standing at that boarded door with Ray's old brass key going warm in her fist. Was that behind the wall of dusty letter slots inside was the one thing that would make all of those people wrong, and would put a scattered town back together one envelope at a time. Before this story is over, she will pry that wall open with her own 2 hands, and a whole valley will remember a quiet man his own wife thought she had already finished mourning. But we are getting ahead of the light. Stay with me, and settle in, and before we begin, take a moment to subscribe and tell me down in the comments where in the world you are listening from tonight, because this is a story about a lamp a man kept burning in a window for a town that had already moved on. And I would like to know who is out there in the dark. She had not meant to arrive at dusk. The drive out from the city was 4 hours, and she had left late because she had spent the morning at a lawyer's office signing the last of the papers that turned Ray's long illness into a stack of medical bills the small insurance did not cover, and a savings account emptied down to that coffee tin. 3 years of it. 3 years of watching a careful man come apart slow, and of selling the good furniture, and of learning to count in tens and then in ones. That was the sentence she kept turning over on the highway. Down to the tin. 31 years married, and it had come down to $63.40 and a set of keys to buildings nobody wanted. She was too tired to be bitter about it anymore. She was mostly just tired. So it was gone 6 o'clock, and the sun was already low and copper over the fields when she came around the last bend, and the little post office rose up out of the overgrowth, smaller and sadder and further gone than she remembered. The brick had been red once. Now it was the brown of old dried blood where 100 winters had leached the color out, and ivy had climbed one whole side of it, thick and clotted, working its fingers up under the eaves. There was a sagging little porch, and a rusted iron bracket by the door where a flag had flown once and flew no more. Over the door, ghosted into the brick and paint gone almost to nothing, you could just make out the shape of 2 words that had once said post office and now said nothing at all, only a paler stain in the shape of letters. Somebody, the county probably, had nailed a notice to the boarded front door, and even from the truck she could read the one pale official word on it. Condemned, behind the building the fields ran off flat and gray into the coming dark, and the empty road went by out front toward nowhere, and the whole scene had the look of a thing the world had quietly agreed to forget. Edith sat in the truck a while with the engine off. She was a broad, plain woman, not tall, gone stout in the middle at her age, and her hair had gone fully silver, and she kept it pinned up in a low bun because that was how it stayed out of her way. She had put on Ray's old charcoal cardigan that morning because it was the warmest thing in her bag, a worn thing, the elbows gone thin, and she had not thought about the fact that it still smelled of him, of pipe smoke and paper dust and the cold iron smell of the mail coat he had worn for 40 years, until she was 2 hours down the road and caught it and had to pull over for a minute. It hung off her. She wore it anyway. Over her plain dress, with the wedding band loose on her weathered hand and Ray's brass key held tight in her fist, sitting in the dark looking at the building he had kept, she felt for the first time in 9 days like she was somewhere she was supposed to be, and she distrusted the feeling immediately, because feelings like that had a way of costing a person. Then she saw the light. There was a lamp burning in the front window of the post office, in the one pane that was not boarded over, low down at the bottom. One warm amber lamp, the only spot of color in 100 yards of blue-gray dusk, throwing its glow out across the dead weeds toward the empty road. Edith's stomach dropped. The place had no power, she was almost certain. The line had been cut when the route was closed, and the sight of a lit lamp in a dead man's boarded window made every hair on her arm stand up. She thought of drifters. She thought of the agent who wanted the corner. She sat and watched it a long minute, and it did not move, and no shadow crossed it, and finally, because she was too tired to be frightened properly, she got out of the truck. Nobody was inside. She knew it the moment she got the swollen side door open, because the smell that came out was of a place shut up for a year and more. Mildew and dust and cold ash, and the dry paper smell of 10,000 old envelopes, no living person underneath it. The lamp on the sill was an old brass kerosene lamp with a glass chimney, and it was not electric at all. It was burning oil. The reservoir was more than half full. Somebody had filled it, and trimmed the wick, and lit it, and gone away. Edith stopped just inside the door with her hand still on the frame, and felt the year fall away, and she heard Ray's voice from a long time back, plain as if he were standing at the sorting bench in the dark. "You leave one lamp lit for the late mail, Edie," he had told her once. Years ago, when she had asked him why he drove clear back out here some evenings after the route was already closed. A letter that's still out in the dark has got to have some place to be headed. You leave a light so it knows where. "But there's no late mail anymore, Ray," she had said. "The route's shut. The town's gone. There's nobody out there. Somebody's always out there," he had said. "That's the whole point of a light. You don't wait to see the letter first." She had forgotten she knew that. She had forgotten a great many things on purpose in the last 3 hard years to make room for the counting. The last time she had stood inside this building she had been young and impatient, come to fetch Ray home for a supper going cold. And she had found him bent over the sorting bench under a bare bulb with a bundle of envelopes in his hands, turning them over one at a time, and when she asked him what on earth was keeping him, he had said, without looking up, just seeing where these ought to go. "They can go in the morning, Ray," she had said. "Supper's cold and I'm tired." "A morning's a long time for a letter that's already waited years," he had said. "You go on. I won't be long." And he had not come home for another hour, and she had gone to bed cross with him, and never once thought to ask him what a letter could be waiting years for. She had thought it was habit. She had thought it was a lonely man drawing out the last thing that still gave his days a shape. She had married a postmaster, and she had never once, in 31 years, asked him what he actually did in the long evenings after the counter closed. And only now, in a building he had left to her and no one else, did the thought arrive that maybe a man who never explains himself is not empty of things to say, only careful about who he asks to carry them. She pushed the thought down where she kept the rest of them. She had no strength left for it tonight. She stayed the night because she had nowhere else to be and no money for a room, and she meant to be gone by the weekend. That was the plan, and it was a simple one. She would spend 3 days clearing out the little building, sign the demolition consent the developer had left for her, take whatever small money the corner lot was worth, and drive back to a rented apartment and a life she no longer recognized with just enough to keep her own lights on until she worked out what came next. She spread her bedroll on the cot in the back room where Ray had plainly slept more nights than she had ever known about, and she lay in the dark listening to the ivy scratch at the brick, and she did not cry, because she had used all of that up at the hospital, and somewhere near midnight she blew the lamp out, and the dark came in complete, and she felt absurdly like she had done something wrong. Morning showed her the full size of the job. The main room was a graveyard of a working life. There was the public counter with its scarred wooden top-worn pail, where 40 years of hands had leaned. There was the great wall of pigeonhole letter slots that ran the whole back of the room, floor to ceiling, hundreds of little brass-edged boxes, most of them empty now, a few still holding a yellowed circular or a dead fly. There was the postmaster's tall desk with its slanted top and its bank of tiny drawers. There was the cold iron stove in the corner and the sorting table, and the smell of paper and mouse and cold ash over all of it. And there was the dust, thick and gray and undisturbed, and Edith stood in the middle of the room with a box of trash bags, and understood that no part of this was worth the gas it had taken to get here. She was clearing the postmaster's desk around mid-morning, pulling open the little drawers one at a time, and finding them full of the small tools of the trade, rubber date stamps, a cracked ink pad, a ball of twine, when her fingers found the paper taped up under the slanted lid where a body would never look unless they were reaching blind. She peeled it loose. It was a single folded sheet in Ray's hard, square hand, the same hand that had signed every birthday card of her married life, and her whole body went still. She knew the writing before she knew the words. It said, "Don't let them empty the wall, girl. Every one of those still belongs to somebody." Edith read it 4 times. She turned the paper over looking for more, and there was no more. The wall he meant had to be the wall of letter slots, she supposed, all those hundreds of little brass-edged boxes standing empty at the back of the room. Still belongs to somebody. Belongs to whom? Ray had been dead 9 days, and had never in his life left her so much as a note on the kitchen table, and here he was talking to her out from under a desk lid, and the maddening thing, the thing that made her sit back on her heels and press the paper to her chest, was that it was so exactly, so infuriatingly him. He had never told her a thing straight out. He made a person find it. Stay with me here, because that folded paper is the whole hinge of this story, and Edith did not yet have the first idea what it meant, and if you have ever gone through the things a quiet person left behind and found a message that felt aimed at you across the years, you already know the particular chill she felt sitting on that dusty floor. Take a second, if you would, and subscribe, so the next lamp in the next window finds you too. She did not have time for it. That was what she told herself. The developer was coming Friday, and she had a building to empty, and a note about a wall of old boxes was a riddle, and riddles did not pay a stack of hospital bills. So she made herself get up. She made herself fill trash bags. But all that day and the next the folded paper sat in the breast pocket of Ray's cardigan, over her heart, and every time she passed those hundreds of little dark boxes her eyes went to it. The building kept talking to her, though, in the small way old places do once a person finally slows down enough to listen. She noticed things she had no words for yet. The pigeonhole slots were labeled, not with box numbers as she had assumed, but with names, family names penciled small on the brass edges. The Alcotts and the Renner girls and Old Petrie and 100 more, and behind the slots marked with the oldest, most faded names the wood had been worn to a shine by a thumb that had reached into them 1,000 times. Then, on the second morning, working her way along the bottom row, she reached into a slot that felt wrong, deeper than the others, and her fingers closed on an envelope. One envelope, alone, caught at the back of the slot where it had slid down out of sight. She drew it into the light. It was addressed in a stranger's hand to a name she did not know, at a house on a road she had never heard of, and stamped across the front in fading purple ink, in the hard official language of the service, were the words returned to sender no such address. But it had not been returned. Ray had kept it. And below the purple stamp, in Ray's own small pencil, was a note that stopped her cold. Renner girl married a Kowalski, moved to the mill town, 3rd house past the church. She turned it over and over. Somebody had written this letter, and it had come back marked undeliverable, and instead of sending it away, stamped dead. Ray had quietly found out where the family had actually gone, and had written it down, and had kept the letter. One letter. She set it on the counter next to the folded note, 2 small mysteries side by side, and told herself she would puzzle over them after Friday. Stay with me, because that single-caught envelope is the first rung of a ladder that ends behind the wall, and Edith was already climbing it without knowing. The man in the gray suit came on the second afternoon, a full day earlier than she expected, which she would later understand was not an accident. The man in the gray suit had a name, Warren Slode, and he was a development agent for a company that had been buying up the good corners along the county road, the ones where the new gas stations and the drive-through banks were going in, and he came up the gravel in a car so clean it looked wet, and he wore a soft gray suit and a watch that cost more than Edith's whole coffee tin, and he had a smile he had clearly practiced. "Mrs. Marsh," he said, both hands coming out as if he might take one of hers. "Warren Slode, I am so sorry for your loss. Truly, your husband was a fixture out here for a lot of years. You knew Ray," Edith said. It was not quite a question. Everybody knew Ray Marsh. Everybody thought the world of him. Slode turned a slow circle in the center of the room, taking in the dead slots, the cold stove, the wall of little brass boxes. Lord, this old letter box. He held on to the keys a long time after they shut the route, didn't he? He said letterbox like a man setting down something he would rather not be caught holding. "I'll be straight with you, Mrs. Marsh, because you strike me as somebody who'd rather have it straight. The county's already condemned the structure. It's on the wrecking list for this quarter. The demolition alone is going to eat most of what the corner's worth, but we like to do right by the old families out here, and my company is prepared to take the whole lot off your hands and handle the teardown ourselves, so you don't have to think about it another day." He named a number. Edith did not react. It was a small number, the kind of number a person could fit inside a birthday card, said now in person as though it were a kindness. "That's the lot and the building both," Slode said into her silence. "That's a check in your hand by Monday. You go on home, you grieve in peace, and this whole cold, sad corner becomes somebody else's problem." "You said everybody thought the world of Ray," Edith said. "If the place is worth nothing, why did you drive clear out here to tell me so in person?" The smile held. "Courtesy, Mrs. Marsh. Your husband earned a face-to-face, not a form letter. Ray spent 40 years turning form letters into face-to-faces," she said. He'd have appreciated that. "What is it you're actually buying, Mr. Slode? Because it isn't the dirt. A man doesn't hurry over dirt. I'm buying you a clean end to a hard week," he said, gentler now, gentling her like a spooked horse. "That's all. You're tired, and you're grieving, and you're reading things into a simple offer that just aren't there. Maybe so," Edith said. "I'll think about it." The smile stayed on his face, but something moved behind it. A flicker of a thing that was not patient. Of course. Take your time. He set a business card on the dead counter, squaring it to the edge with one finger. "Offers good through Friday. After Friday, the county vote goes through and the wreckers are scheduled, and once a building's down, there's nothing to negotiate over. Just dirt. And I'll be honest with you, sentiment's a lovely thing, but it doesn't keep the lights on." Then he looked, just once, quick, at the rows of pigeonhole boxes along the back. And then he was gone in a spray of gravel, and Edith stood in the doorway holding his card and thinking about how his eyes had gone to that wall, and she took the folded note out of her breast pocket and read it a fifth time. Mind the wall, he had all but written. She looked at the hundreds of little boxes, and for the first time she wondered what a development agent could possibly want with a wall of dead mail slots in a building he was so eager to knock down. That night, she did not sleep. She lit the lamp because she could not stand the dark without it now, and she carried the work light over to the tall bank of pigeonhole slots and looked at it properly at last. It was a fine old piece of joinery, that wall, oak gone black with age, the little boxes framed in brass, and it ran from the floor to well above her head and the whole width of the room. She had taken it for what it looked like, a fixed panel of dead boxes bolted against the brick. But standing close with the light raking across it, she saw that the frame did not quite meet the side wall. There was a gap, hairline thin, running floor to ceiling down the right-hand edge, and when she pressed her palm flat against that end of the great oak panel and leaned, Something behind it gave, the smallest fraction, with the soft complaint of a hinge that had not moved in years. The wall of letter slots was not fixed to the brick at all. It was a door. Her heart was going hard. She found the catch at last, a plain iron hook up high behind the top row of slots where a customer's hand would never reach, and she worked it free, and she braced her boots and pulled. And the whole great wall of pigeonholes swung out from the brick on its hidden hinges, slow and heavy, and the cold breathed out of the dark space behind it and touched her face. Behind the wall was a room. Not a large one, a narrow brick cell the depth of a closet and the width of the building, windowless, dry, smelling of dust and canvas and old paper. And it was full, stacked along both walls, floor to shoulder height, were mail sacks. Canvas mail sacks, the heavy government kind with the brass grommets and the draw cords, gray with age, some of them split at the seams so their contents showed, and their contents were letters, bundled letters, hundreds to a sack, tied in string, sack after sack after sack of them, receding into the dark. Stay with me, because this is the thing the whole building had been keeping. And Edith stood at the mouth of that hidden room with the lamp throwing her shadow huge across the sacks and Ray's cardigan gone cold with the sweat of the pull, and she understood, before she ever untied a single bundle, that Warren Sloat had known this room was here. And that was why his clean eyes had dropped to the wall, and that was why the offer was suddenly good only through Friday. Subscribe now, because what Edith finds in those sacks is going to turn a condemned letterbox into the one thing that can pull a whole scattered valley back together, and Warren Sloat is not going to take it lying down. She lifted the first bundle out into the light with both hands. The string was cloth tape, tied in a neat bow, Ray's bow, the one he put on everything, and when it came loose the letters fanned out across the counter, a dozen of them. 24. All of them addressed in different hands to different people, and all of them, every single one, stamped across the front in that fading purple ink. Undeliverable, no such person, no such address. Moved, left no word. And below the purple stamp on every one, in Ray's small, careful pencil, a note. Bertelsen boy shipped out, mother forwards to the county home on the Ridge Road. And on the next, Alcott's lost the farm in the dry year, gone to her sister's in the city, look for the name Pruitt. And on the next, old Petrie's daughter never came back but writes to the church, leave it with the pastor. Edith read them one after another, standing there in the cold, and slow, the shape of it came up out of the dark at her, just as the room itself had. These were the undelivered letters. 40 years of them. Every letter that had come through this crossroads office, addressed to somebody who had moved, or married, or died, or been foreclosed off their land, or simply vanished as people did in a hard country, every letter the service told a postmaster to stamp dead and send back into the void, Ray had not sent back. He had held them. He had kept them here behind the wall, sack by sack, year by year, and for as many of them as a patient man could manage, he had quietly gone and found out where the family had really gone, and had written it in pencil on the envelope so that someday somebody could finish the delivery the rubber stamp would have killed. She sat down hard on the postmaster's stool. She thought she had known her husband. She had thought he was a quiet man who ran a small office and drove a small route and drew out his evenings because he was lonely, and here in front of her was the private 40-year labor of that man laid open, and it was nothing she had ever guessed, and it was so much larger than the small life she had grieved that she had to put her face in her hands a moment and breathe. In the postmaster's tall desk, in the deepest drawer, she found the last piece, and it was the one that made the whole of it hold together. It was a route book. A thick ledger, the pages soft as cloth from handling, and down the columns in Ray's hand ran the record of the thing he had been doing all those evenings. She thought he was only killing time. Every returned letter, dated and logged. And beside each one, the forwarding trail he had tracked down on his own, unpaid, on foot and by telephone, and by asking after people at church and at the feed store for 30 and 40 years. Where a family had gone. Where they had gone after that. which of them had passed, and where they were buried, so a letter meant for a dead man could go instead to the child who would want to have it. He had cross-referenced the whole scattered diaspora of a dying valley, every family the closing of the route and the failing of the farms had blown apart, and he had kept the thread. He had refused to let a rubber stamp be the last word between people who had lost track of one another. Stay with me here, because that route book is the reason my grandmother's old saying was never really about letters at all, and Edith turned its soft pages by lamplight past 2 a.m. and finally understood what the note under the desk had meant. Not a riddle at all. An instruction, and a trust, and the nearest a careful man had ever come to telling her what he had carried. If you have listened this far into the night, take a breath and subscribe, and let us go finish what Ray started. She understood, too, sitting there, why Slode wanted the wall emptied and the building down before Friday, and it had nothing to do with the corner lot. Warren Slode had grown up in this valley. She would learn that soon enough. And there was more than one family in a small county who would just as soon a wall full of 40-year-old truths stayed boarded up and got quietly carted to the dump. A returned letter is a small thing until you know what it says. Some of these had been coming back and forth for a lifetime, and not everyone in a scattered family wanted the thread picked back up. She was still sitting there past 3 a.m. when the headlights swept the window. It was not the clean gray car. It was a plain pickup, and the young man who got out of it and knocked on the boarded door was not Warren Slode. He was younger, and Edith knew him, or knew of him, a nephew of Ray's on his brother's side, a soft-handed man named Dale, who had come to the funeral late and left early, and whom she had spoken to for the length of one handshake. "Aunt Edith?" He had a friendly, worried voice. I saw the light on. "Lord, it's the middle of the night. What are you doing way out here by yourself?" He came in when she opened the door, rubbing his arms against the cold, taking in the open wall and the sacks and the letters spread across the counter with a quick flat glance that lingered a half-second too long. "You shouldn't be out here alone. This place isn't safe, they've got it condemned. Listen, I've been thinking. That fella Slode came and saw me, since I'm family. He upped his number. He'll go quite a bit higher than what he told you, and he'll pay it this week cash and split it clean, half to you and half to the family, seeing as it's family property. All you got to do is sign the consent, and we both walk away from this cold, sad place with something in our pockets before the county knocks it flat for free." He smiled at her, gentle, reasonable. "Ray wouldn't want you spending your grief out here in the dark chasing a pile of dead mail, Aunt Edith. Let it go. Sign it Friday and come home." Edith looked at him a long moment. She looked at the letters spread on the counter. 40 years of a man refusing to let a thread be cut, and she looked at his nephew, who had come at 3 a.m. the same night the sacks came out of the wall, and she understood that Warren Slode had not gone to the family out of respect. He had gone to the family because the family had a name Slode needed, and because a grieving widow was easier to move if the pressure arrived in a voice she was meant to trust. "I don't sign anything at night," Edith said. "And I don't sign anything until I've read what's in this room. If your Mr. Slode wants to see me, he can come to the county building Monday morning, in the daylight, where there's a record kept." She held the door. "Go home, Dale, get some sleep, and tell him what I said." Dale's friendly face did the same thing Slode's had done, the smile staying put while something cold and thwarted moved behind it. But he was not a hard man, only a weak one, and he went, and the pickup swung its lights off the window and was gone, and Edith stood alone with the lamp and the open wall and understood, fully now, that the one thing these men could not survive was for these letters to be read out loud in the daylight by the people they were addressed to. A boarded building full of dead mail was worth nothing and threatened no one. A widow finishing her husband's route, putting 40 years of held-back letters into the right hands one family at a time, was another thing entirely. She got no sleep at all after that, and at first gray light she did not go to the county to sign anything. She sat down at the sorting table with the route book open beside her, and she picked up the first bundle, and she began to read where the families had gone. and to sort the letters not by dead stamp but by living address, which was the thing Ray had spent 40 years making it possible for someone to do. She was going to finish the route. That was the decision she made at dawn on the third day, with that coffee tin fortune to her name and a wrecking crew scheduled for Friday, and it was the least sensible thing she had ever done, and she had never in her life been more sure of anything. The first delivery she made herself, because she did not yet trust it to be real. The route book said the Renner girl who married a Kowalski had moved off to the mill town, third house past the church, and Edith drove the 4 miles with the single-caught envelope, the very first one she had found, on the seat beside her. The house was there. An old woman answered the door, older than Edith, bird-thin, suspicious of a stranger, and Edith said only that she had a letter that had been meant for this family a long time ago and had never been delivered, and she held it out. The old woman took it and turned it over and saw the addressee's name, and her face changed like a field when a cloud goes off the sun. "That's my mother's hand," she said. "That's my mother. She's been gone 30 years. She looked up at Edith, and her eyes had filled. "This is the last letter she ever wrote me. It came back. I always thought I'd done something, that she'd changed the address to keep me out, we'd quarreled. I was young and stupid, and I moved, and never she stopped." She held the letter against her chest with both hands, pressed there like the folded note Edith had pressed to her own heart. "Where has this been?" "A good man kept it safe," Edith said, "until somebody could bring it to you." "Kept it," the old woman repeated. "All this while." She pressed her lips together hard. "Who was he?" "My husband. The postmaster out at the crossroads. He never let one come back marked dead if he could help it. He'd find out where you'd got to, and he'd hold it, and he'd wait. And now he's gone, and you drove it out yourself. He can't finish the round," Edith said. "So I will." She drove back to the crossroads with her own eyes wet and something moving in her chest that she had not felt since before the hospital. And she understood that Ray had not left her a building or a debt or a riddle. He had left her a job. And she found, to her own great surprise, that she wanted it more than she had ever wanted anything money could have bought. She could not do it alone, and she did not have to, because a small county talks. By the third delivery, word had begun to move along the old roads as it used to, before the route closed, and people started coming to her. They came up the gravel to the condemned building with the ivy on it, first in ones and twos, then in a steady patient line, because they had heard that Ray Marsh's widow was up at the old letter box, and she had the mail. Not new mail. The old mail. The letters that never came, and Edith stood at the scarred public counter that had been worn pale by 40 years of hands, and she did what her husband had made possible, and she put the letters into the right hands, one family at a time, in the daylight, where anyone could see. Stay with me now, because this is where the story stops being about a building and becomes about a valley, and it is the part I most want you to hear. There was a soldier's letter, written by a young man to his sweetheart the week before he shipped out, returned no such address because she had already moved to nurse her sick father 2 counties over, and it came now, 40 years late, into the hands of a widow who had married someone else, believing the boy had simply never written, and who sat down on the porch step of the post office and read it and wept for the girl she had been. There was a letter from a father to a son they had not spoken in 20 years over a thing so small neither of them could quite remember it, a letter the son had never known was sent, because it came back moved, left no word. And Ray had tracked the son to a town 4 hours off and written it in the book, and now the son drove all 4 of those hours to stand in the little brick room and hold his dead father's handwriting and say, to no one, he did write. He said he was sorry. He wrote it down, and he sent it, and I never knew. There was a woman who got the letter that told her where her mother was buried, a thing her family had kept from her out of spite, and who could finally go and stand at the grave. One by one, the scattered and estranged families of the valley came back to the crossroads, and the rubber stamp that would have cut each one of those threads had been beaten, quietly, for 40 years, by a man who simply refused to let it win. And here is the thing about a town that has been quietly put back together. It does not forget who did it. Friday came, the day of the county vote, the day the wreckers were scheduled and the demolition consent was due, and Warren Sloat arrived at the county building with his clean car and his slim folder, expecting to watch a formality. What he found was that the little meeting room could not hold the people. They had come from all over the valley and from the mill town and from 4 hours off. The Renners and the Alcotts and the Bertelsons and the Petries and the soldier's widow and the father's son, all the scattered families Ray had spent 40 years keeping the thread to, and they had come to the condemnation hearing for the old Crossroads post office, and one after another, without any speech from Edith, without any speech at all. They stood up and told the county board what had come to them out of that boarded building this week. Warren Sloat sat in the front row and watched the corner lot he had already sold in his mind fill up with the one thing a development agent cannot buy off or knock down, which is a town that has decided a thing belongs to it. When the board called the vote, the condemnation was struck, the building taken off the wrecking list, and the corner lot Sloat wanted stayed exactly what it had always been, which was the place the valley's mail came home to. He did not stay to congratulate anyone. He gathered his slim folder and went out to his clean car, and Dale the nephew went with him, and the two of them drove off down the empty road, and the valley let them go and turned back to Edith, who had not said a word. It did not take a speech. That is the thing to understand about how it turned, and it is what separates what really happened from the version where a woman stands up in a meeting and makes everyone sorry. Edith never made a speech. The letters did the talking. 40 years of them, in the hands of the people they were finally delivered to, said everything that needed saying, in 100 quiet voices, and there was not a thing a development agent could do against that, because you cannot argue with a mother's last letter finally reaching her daughter. You cannot knock it down. You cannot buy it back. The one card Sloat and the family had to play, the pressure of money on a grieving widow, had been the wrong card to play on a woman who had already lost the only thing she was afraid to lose, and who had found, behind a wall of dead letter slots, something she wanted more than any check. But there was one bundle in the deepest sack she had not opened, the smallest one, tied with the same cloth tape as all the rest, and it had her own name on it, and she had been afraid of it, and she saved it for last. She opened it that night, alone, the Friday the building was saved, sitting at the sorting table with the lamp burning beside her and the ivy scratching at the brick. And stay with me now, because this is the whole reason my grandmother's line about the man who keeps the letters was never really about letters at all. Everything until this moment had been about the valley, about who owned the corner, about whose thread Ray had kept and whose family came home. What was in the last bundle was about the two of them. It was a letter, in Ray's blocky hand, and it was addressed on the outside fold, in ink gone a little brown with the years, to Edie. Her name. He had never called her anything else, and no one had called her Edie since he died, and seeing it in his writing was like a warm hand laid flat over her heart. She read it by the lamp. He wrote the way he talked, which was to say hardly at all, and she heard every word of it in his quiet voice. Edie, it began, if you are reading this, then I'm gone, and you did the thing I always knew you'd do, which is look behind the wall instead of just knocking it down. People are going to tell you this old letterbox is worthless. A man in a nice suit is going to tell you the dirt's worth more with the building gone. He's wrong. And here's why. And I need you to know it in my own hand and not just guess at it. I never sent those letters back. You'll have seen that by now. The service says when a letter can't be delivered, you stamp it dead and return it, and if the sender's gone too, you burn it. I couldn't do it. I want to tell you why, since I never could say it out loud, and you were the only person who ever asked me the right question anyhow. When I was a boy, my own father went off to find work in the bad years, and he wrote my mother a letter every week. And one week the letters stopped, and we thought he'd left us. We spent years thinking it. My mother went to her grave thinking her husband had walked out on his children. It was not until I was grown and took this job that I found out what happened, because I understood the machinery of it by then. He never stopped writing. We had moved, we lost the farm the same as everybody, and his letters came back to him, stamped return to sender. No such address, and a proud, hurt man on the far end of a bad road decided that meant we did not want to hear from him. And he stopped. A rubber stamp took my father from me. Not the miles. Not the years. A stamp, and two people too proud to fight it. That is the truth I have carried my whole life, and it is why I could never, once I stood on this side of that counter, let a stamp be the last word between two people who loved each other and just lost the road between them. So I kept them. I kept them so somebody could one day carry each one the rest of the way. I always meant to finish the route myself, and then I got sick, and I ran out of road. So I'm leaving it to you, and I know the others will squawk about family property, and I want it down here in ink why it's you and not them. It's the light. Edie. You're the only one who ever asked me why I drove clear back out here to leave a lamp burning in the window for a late mail that wasn't coming anymore. The others thought it was foolishness. My own brother thought I'd gone soft. You asked me, that first year we were married, and you didn't laugh, and when I told you a letter out in the dark has got to have someplace to be headed, you nodded like it was the most sensible thing you ever heard. Everybody else wanted to know what the office was worth. You were the only soul that ever asked me what it was for. So it's yours, Edie. Keep the light in the window. Finish the route if you've a mind to, and if you haven't, at least don't let them empty the wall. No letter is dead as long as somebody still means to carry it home. I mean to be one who did. The door's not locked. It never was. Edith sat with that a long time. The lamp burned. The ivy moved against the brick. Somewhere down the dark road a car went by, its lights sweeping the empty fields. Some late traveler headed home, and she got up on stiff knees and trimmed the wick, and set the lamp square in the window facing the road, just as Ray had every night for 40 years, and she watched its glow reach out across the dead weeds toward whoever might still be traveling that road, and she understood at last that she had not inherited a building, or a corner lot, or a fight with a developer. She had inherited the whole of him, the part he had never known how to say, and a job worth doing, and she found, to her own surprise, that she was not alone anymore, and had not been since the moment she pried the wall open. She did not sell. Warren Slode's grown-up number, when it came a last time in his slim folder, went back unsigned. She had the condemned notice lifted, which took nothing more than a county inspector, a new porch beam, and the plain truth that the little brick building had never been dangerous, only unwanted. She patched the porch herself and pulled the worst of the ivy off the good south wall and repainted the two ghost words over the door in the square block letters the service had used. Post office. And under them, small, because she could not help herself, she painted a little lamp. She could not reopen the route, that was gone for good, but she did the next thing, and it was better. One morning a week, she opened the window of the Crossroads office and let anyone in the valley who wanted to come and write a letter and mail it, or read one of the old ones that had finally come home. And slowly the Crossroads became again what it had been before the world moved on, which was the place a scattered people kept the thread between them. The relatives stopped calling once it was plain there was no windfall to divide, that the corner would never be sold, and the money there had never been was never going to appear, and Edith let them go without bitterness, because a person who only shows up for the corner lot is not somebody you have really lost. But the valley came. The soldier's widow came Sundays and helped her sort. The father's son, who had made his 4-hour peace with the dead man's handwriting, drove out once a month and stayed for an hour on the porch. And old Mrs. Kowalski, the Renner girl, the very first delivery, came every week with her mother's last letter tucked in her purse like a thing she could not bear to be parted from, and sat by the window while Edith worked. "Your husband," she told Edith one evening, watching the lamp go warm as the dusk came down, "he carried this whole valley on his back for 40 years and never let one of us feel the weight of it. We thought he was just a fella ran the little post office." She shook her head. "We had no idea what he was." "Neither did I," Edith said. "That's the part I'm still learning to forgive myself for." "Don't, Mrs. Kowalski said. "He didn't want you to know. That was the whole point of it. A man doesn't hold a secret that long so he can be thanked for it." And every single night, the last thing before the dark came in complete, the silver-haired woman in the worn charcoal cardigan that had been her husband's would fill the old brass lamp and trim the wick and light it, and set it square in the window facing the empty road, for the late mail, for whoever was still out there in the dark and needed something to be headed toward. She kept the light in the window. She kept the door unlocked. She was not rich, not in the sense Sloat had meant it, and she found she did not want to be. She was something better than rich. She was where she was supposed to be, doing the one thing she had been left, and needed, and remembered, and if you have listened this far into the dark, you already know that is the only fortune that was ever really behind that wall. Perhaps that is the part most of us miss, waiting for the windfall, waiting for the box of money, waiting for the version where we stand up in the meeting and make everyone sorry. The corner lot was never the treasure. The number in the gray suits folder was never the treasure. The treasure was a man who refused to let a rubber stamp have the final say between people who loved each other, and a wife who was the single soul who ever thought to ask him why he kept the lamp lit, and a letter that finally reaches the hand it was always meant for. If there is a word you have been meaning to carry to somebody still out there on the dark road, a letter you never finished, a call you keep not making, do not wait for a wall to open and tell you it is worth it. Carry it the rest of the way. No letter is dead as long as somebody still means to carry it home. So I will leave you with the question Edith had to answer, and maybe you have one like it waiting for you. When it finally comes to you, the thing you were left, the thing nobody else wanted, will you be the one who asks what it is worth, or will you be the one who asks what it is for? Sit with that tonight. And thank you for listening, for staying all the way to the end, and for keeping a light on out there, wherever in the world you are.